Work 3 days and then no more. That's just enough to keep a good man sore. What's the matter, operator, that you don't sign? Put your name or your number down on a dotted line.
I'm going to post this video on both the Divine Mercy playlist and the 3 Days of Darkness playlist, since it seems to belong to both of them. In the first video on the 3 Days of Darkness playlist, I cited St. John of the Cross, who teaches us that visions, even when they come from God, should never be taken literally. Even the great prophets from the Old Testament misunderstood prophecy when they tried to take them literally. Please note that no saint canonized prior to the Second Vatican Council ever prophesied 3 days of darkness. However, even if they had, those prophecies should not have been taken literally. Interestingly, Sister Faustina is credited for having prophesied 3 days of darkness. Her diary says, "Write this. Before I come as the just judge, I am coming as the King of mercy. Before the day of justice arrives, there will be given to the people a sign in the heavens of this sort. All the light in the heavens will be extinguished, and there will be great darkness over the whole earth. Then the sign of the cross will be seen in the sky, and from the openings where the hands and the feet of the Savior were nailed will come forth great lights which will light up the earth for a period of time. This will take place shortly before the last day." Did this prophecy come from God? No, almost certainly it came from herself in the form of successive locutions. Sister Faustina's own diary suggests that Father Bukowski thought that some of her visions may have come from herself. Father Bukowski said, "What I said to you was said as a warning, because illusions may afflict even holy persons, and Satan's insinuations may play a part of this. And sometimes this comes from our own selves, so one has to be careful." In an earlier video we discussed how this happens. St. John of the Cross wrote, "These successive words always come to a person when the spirit is recollected and absorbed very attentively in some meditation. And in its reflections upon that same manner of which it is thinking, it proceeds from one stage to another, forming words and arguments which are very much to the point, with great facility and distinctiveness, and by means of its reasoning discovers things that it didn't know with respect to the subject of its reflections. So that it seems not to be doing this itself, but rather it seems that another person is supplying the reasoning within its mind, or answering its questions or teaching it. And in truth, it has good cause for thinking this. For the soul itself is reasoning with itself and answering itself as though it were two persons convening together. For such a one knows not the facility with which the understanding can form words inwardly, as though they came from a third person." But St. John continues, "I am appalled by what happens these days, namely, when some soul with the very smallest experience of meditation at once christens them all as coming from God, and assumes that this is the case, saying, 'God said this to me,' or 'God answered me,' whereas it was not so at all. But as we have said, it is, for the most part, they who are saying these things to themselves." The desire people have for locutions, and the pleasure that comes to their spirits from them, leads them to make answers to themselves, and then think it is God who is answering them and speaking to them. They therefore commit great blunders unless they impose the strict restraint upon themselves, and unless their director obliges them to abstain from these kinds of reflection. For they are apt to gain from them mere nonsensical talk and impurity of soul rather than humility and mortification of spirit, if they think, "This was indeed a great thing," and "God was speaking to me," whereas it will have been a little more than nothing, or nothing at all, or less than nothing. So last year we discussed how Sister Faustina's so-called vision of hell gave the almost exact same description that James Joyce provided in his novel Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man. With Joyce, he was just repeating what he had heard before, and in a way Sister Faustina was doing the same thing. She had just internalized what she had heard before, and then she reformulated it, and it seemed to her to have come from God, but actually the words came from herself. She almost certainly did the same thing with her 3 Days of Darkness prophecy. So where did the 3 Days of Darkness legend actually come from? Well, it's a Catholic urban legend, and it's rooted in fake news. The Chicago Tribune reported on a fake news story that was circulating in other newspapers. The fake news reports falsely attributed the story and prophecy of 3 Days of Darkness to Pope Leo XIII. The papers said that there would be darkness for 3 days, with a total eclipse of the sun, and the fake news said that it would be impossible to kindle any light which had not been blessed. Further, the fake news said that Pope Leo said this would occur before September 20th of 1870. Though that date came and went without incident, just like modern fake news, the initial impressions were what lasted. And so, well-meaning spiritual people heard the story and they internalized it, and like Sister Faustina, went over it in their heads until the words came back to them as though they were coming from someone else. So, the next year, the Tribune also reported an instance of the close connection between natural phenomena and superstitious observances is found in the ideas prevalent in Quebec just after the slight shock of an earthquake there. While the lower classes were still overwhelmed with terror, a certain unnamed woman made a public prophecy that there would be, during the month, 3 days of darkness, during which holy candles alone would burn, and during which anyone who went outdoors would die forthwith. The sales of holy candles to give light during the 3 days, and the sales of provisions to have stored ready for use were immense, and now the faithful were anxiously awaiting the coming of this new phenomenon. Curiously enough, the prophetess changed her prediction to say that the darkness was a sign of the triumph of the church over the world, which event was to occur in Rome of 1873. Of course, that date came and went without incident, but at least in those days, prophets had enough integrity to place target dates on their prophecies. Nowadays, they leave them all open-ended. The Cincinnati Enquirer added some more detail to that same prophecy in Canada. It said that the prophetess, like Sister Faustina, was a nun, and it also added the detail that anyone who ventured out of doors or tried to observe the phenomenon would die. Again, it was to take place the following year. Here we see that some months later in Chile, someone prophesied that Chile would experience 3 days of darkness for permitting Victor Emmanuel for annexing the Papal States. Again, none of these people really had the intent of lying. They all believed that they heard words from God, but actually they came from themselves. Then in July of 1872, a priest in Bellary, India, had a vision that 3 days of darkness would occur the following August. He said that no light other than that coming from consecrated candles or oil would dispel the light. Please note that this article concludes by saying that a European on the continent published a volume spreading this and other predictions, which likely helped perpetuate the urban legend. The pre-conciliar church, of course, has never approved any of these so-called visions. And St. John of the Cross explains why we should not be miracle mongers and chase after private revelations. And thus, men at the time of the Old Testament were not authorized or empowered at that time to give credence to what was said by God, unless it was approved by the mouths of priests or prophets. And nowadays, the church itself fills that role. For God is so desirous that the government and direction of every man should be undertaken by another man like himself, and that every man should be ruled and governed by natural reason, and that he earnestly desires not to give entire credence to the things that he communicates to us supernaturally, nor consider them as being securely and completely confirmed until they pass through this human aqueduct of the mouth of man, meaning approval by the church. Be a good Catholic, don't be a miracle monger. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll be back again within a week with another one. But in the meantime, please check out my Facebook page and my Twitter page. Every day I post additional content that you won't find on this YouTube channel. And also, please pray for the church.
Could it be an urban legend?
Urban legend.